As Robert mentioned earlier, and as we were thinking about this concept of the I Am, we're continuing our series in this time of year where we're looking at the Old Made New and seeing how the Old Testament and the stories that we know and maybe learned as a child as an Old Testament story and maybe made some applications to. We're looking to see how does that come alive in the New Testament? How does the gospel writers and Jesus and others use that? So today we're moving from the book of Genesis. We didn't do all the stories in the book of Genesis, but we did some of them. We're moving to the book of Exodus. And what we find in the book of Exodus is some stories that are referred to a lot in the New Testament as well. And one of those characters that you've probably heard of in the book of Exodus is Moses. Moses is a guy who led them through the Red Sea. He did a lot of things. And it's interesting then to see how many times that Moses is referred to in the rest of the Bible. It's a lot of times. In fact, Moses is the third mentioned character or person. The third highest mentions of anybody in the Bible is Moses. Now here's for that next trivia night that you're going to. Here are some things. Moses is mentioned 803 times in the Bible and the things he did. Number 2, David comes in at number 2 at 974. And heading the list is, who do you think? Jesus, 1,310 times. Now, we are going to look at Moses and some of the major events in the life of Moses, and we're going to learn from that. We're not going to deal with all of his story. We're going to jump into Exodus chapter 3 today, and the first 2 chapters tell his story of how he was born, and his mom was afraid that he was going to be destroyed as a Hebrew child, and he was put in the basket and floated upriver and picked up by Pharaoh's daughter, and he was raised in the Egyptian household. Now, he is there because in the book of Genesis, the children of Israel had grown, and Joseph had been sent off actually to die. He was picked up, taken to Egypt, and God, making a long story short, raised him up to be a leader. And there was a famine in the land, and Joseph heard that through his brothers that the family was starving to death, and he invites 70 of his family, that's all there were, to come down and live in Egypt in the land of Goshen, and he would take care of them, and he did. And God blessed them, and they grew it into a multi-million member nation, a lot of people. But a new Pharaoh came along, and he said, man, where'd all these people come from? And he felt threatened by them and put them under slavery. And then the story of Moses comes alive when he is the one that leads them out. So we're going to look at a portion of Scripture today before the leading out that's key, not only in the Old Testament story, but also in the New Testament story. It's found in Exodus 3, and I'm going to read it for you. Exodus 3, 1 through about verse 16, and it goes like this. Now Moses was tending the flock of his Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock into the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Now we're at this point in Moses' life where he has flown from Egypt. Why? Because he saw one of his Hebrew brothers being mistreated, and he killed the Egyptian. He feared for his life, said, I've got to get out of Dodge. And he went east, and while he was there, he found a wife and married her, and now he's living with his father-in-law and his wife's family, and he's a shepherd. He's up there on the mountain one day. Something strange happens. Verse 2. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flames of fire from within a bush. And Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I'll go over and see this strange sight. Why the bush does not burn up? And when the Lord saw that he had gone to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. And then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. And then God goes on and tells Moses, look, I've heard the crying of my people in the land of Egypt, and I'm going to rescue them. I'm going to bring them out of that bondage that they're in. And then in verse 10 it says, so now, this is what God's saying to Moses, so now I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Notice that God says He doesn't ask him. He doesn't, suggest it. He says, I'm sending you. So in verse 10, this is what happens. So now I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. And God said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. And when you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. And Moses said to God, and he's starting to show his doubt here a little bit. He says, well, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your father sent me to you, and they ask, what is his name? Then what should I tell them? Now, why would Moses ask such a question? Well, I think he wanted to go back and have some authority, but in the culture that Moses grew up in, as well as remember all the Israelites that were now slaves in Egypt, Egypt was a land full of multiple gods. In fact, what's interesting is you go on and you study the 10 plagues, each one of the plagues that God brought on to Egypt directly attacked one of the Egyptian gods and showed that he had power over those foreign gods. But here Moses said, well, the people are going to want to know. And God says to them in verse 14, here's how he answered his question. God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are saying to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. Now what's significant about that answer is, up to this time, God had always been referred to as Jehovah. It began back in Genesis chapter 4. And Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all the people knew God as Jehovah. And yet God here in Exodus 3, at this turning point in the history of his people, Moses asked, well, who do I say? And he says, I am. And that phrase is significant. It takes the Hebrew word for Jehovah and basically takes the verb form of that. And it basically says, I am. I exist. I am the past, I am the present, I am the future. And he turns the word of God, the name for God, into almost a verb. And then he goes on to clarify to Moses, just in case Moses is still confused. He says in verse 15, now God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name which I am to be remembered from generation to generation. And after this exchange, the story goes on. I encourage you to read Exodus 3 and 4 on your own. It's Moses having doubts. And, but God. And God just takes care of every one of his excuses and says, all right, get off this mountain and head towards Egypt. And Moses does. But what's interesting with God said, I would be remembered, though, by the name I just gave you, for generation to generation. And that's how it relates to the New Testament. Because what we find from this Old Testament story and this name of God is that Jesus then takes that phrase and he applies it to himself. And that's significant because what he is saying is, I am God. And there's two things I want us to look at today, and I wrestled with how to do this. And, it's easy to look at all the technical things and break things down and say, no, this fact, and this fact. And I basically had developed that, and God just wrestled with my heart and said, no, if that's all you do, you're missing the whole point. You need to see who Jesus is in all of this. So there's two major things I want us to think about today, and I want us to see. First, we need to see the power of the I am in Jesus. The power of the I am in Jesus. That one of those things that Jesus does is that he takes this phrase that God uses in Exodus 3, and then he applies it to himself. When is the first time that happens? Well, John chapter 6, we have this. Synopsis of the story. Then they saw Jesus walking on the sea, and they were frightened. But he said to them, it is I am. Do not be afraid. Wow. It is the I am, the one who was, the one who is, and the one who will be. And we need to get a grasp of the power of Jesus. He comes walking on the water. And it hit me how significant that is, because Jesus was there in the beginning in creation. John 1 says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And there was nothing that had been made that had not been made through Him. So Jesus comes taking a stroll on what? On water. How many times had you seen that? And what it shows is that He has the power over His creation. And I don't know if we grasp that enough. You know, we can think about creation. Here's some pictures that some of these I took. That one of the butterfly up there is a butterfly that was out here in the parking lot on one of our fire bushes. Next is some mountains, some rocky cliffs I saw in Colorado. I didn't take the picture of the fall foliage. I've seen that, though, up in New England. This is from out west. Beautiful lakes. We were up in Montana, Missoula, outside of Missoula, Montana, St. Ignatius, Mission Lake. It's one of those lakes, just a mirror of the mountain behind it. The Cardinal. A picture of the rainbow. I had the privilege of taking that right out here in Bonita Beach. I was in New Pass. I was in my boat fishing, and this beautiful, and the picture does not do it justice. That's water at the bottom, and it's green, and the sun came out, and this beautiful arch rainbow. And you look at that, and you think, wow. The same God who created those mountains, and the same God who created those rocky clefts, is the same God who created the delicate wings of a butterfly, or the feathers on a bird that allows him to fly, or the rainbow over the waters. That's a part of His promise from many years ago. And we need to understand the power of His creation and what it takes to do those things. We also see the power of His creation in other ways. Anybody recognize the picture on the left-hand corner down there? This is Hurricane Ian, if you've heard of that. And I'm right there at that point, waving. Can you see me on my lanai? As we're watching Hurricane Ian come in, amazing power, devastating power. And sometimes we go, well, why did God allow things like that to happen? Well, I got to thinking about that one day. You know, God has been doing the hurricanes long before we moved to Florida. We just got in the way of what He does. Amazing power. The next picture, lightning. You ever seen a lightning storm in the summer? You just stand there. It's just amazing. Better than any 4th of July show you'll ever see. A volcano. I've never seen a volcano. I'd like to see a volcano. Maybe I put that on my bucket list someday. Maybe go to Hawaii. From a distance, of course. But I'm also the type that would love to walk up to the edge of that flow of lava. But I'm sure my wife would correct me on that thought. A tornado. I grew up in the Midwest, grew up in southern Indiana, and the devastating power. I never really have seen a tornado funnel cloud, believe it or not, in all those years, but I've seen the effect of a tornado. We had one go through Springfield where I ministered there, and it went right down the main drag, kind of like Tamiami, and it came and it jumped right over the church and then landed back down and kept on going. And what was amazing, that allowed our church to be a ministry center for the next 2 weeks, and we coordinated all kinds of meals and things and had an outreach in the community that was amazing. But I got to see the amazing power of a tornado. We organized a community cleanup work day, and we had a couple down here in Florida that was snowbirds, and they called me up and said, "Hey, Jeff, would you go down and check on the house?" And I said, "Sure." They were about 2 blocks south of the church, and I went there and I looked. I saw a hole, not a major hole in the roof, but saw a hole in the roof, and they told me where the keys were, and I went inside, and everything looked pretty good until I went into the bedroom, and in the bedroom, this branch had gone through the roof, gone through the rafters, and had spread out these 3 huge branches, just like claws, getting ready to snatch whoever it was there in the bed. And I thought, man, that would have been neat to be laying there. Well, maybe not, but, it was an amazing sight, the power of that tornado. And you've heard the stories of straws driven through trees and all. It's amazing power. God is also the power of nature, the tornado and the volcano and the hurricanes and lightning and all of those things. But what we need to realize is that Jesus is more powerful than his creation. He comes what? He comes walking on the water for a stroll. And the disciple, what are you doing? Who are you? What? Oh, I'm just taking a walk on what I created. No big deal. And we need to understand his power. When he says, I am the I am, after he walks on water, he's saying, I'm all powerful. I'm over all of creation. And then in Matthew chapter 11, at the end of the chapter, what does the creator of the universe and sustainer of the universe do? He says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Wow. And we need to be overwhelmed by his power. And we need to reflect on his majesty more. He is also more powerful, not only over creation, but he's more powerful than anyone on earth. In the Garden of Gethsemane in John chapter 18, when they're coming to arrest Jesus, this is a synopsis of what happens. When they came to arrest him in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus said to the soldiers, whom do you seek? And they answered, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus answered, I am he. There it is. It uses that phrase again. I am who that I am. And when Jesus said to them, this is what I want you to see in this. When Jesus said to them, I am he, they retreated and fell to the ground. And then Jesus says, hey, look, I told you that I am. Why did they retreat and fall to the ground? Because even though they were soldiers, even though they had the power of Rome, the strongest empire known to ancient mankind behind them, they had to fall to their knees because he is the King of kings and Lord of lords. And when they heard that phrase, it wasn't just any phrase. It was a phrase to recognize who he was. He's more powerful than any authority on earth. He's more powerful than any man that's ever ruled. He's more powerful than any nation that's ever reigned. He's more powerful than all the kings of the earth put together. He is the great I am. And as the soldiers fell on their knees before him, we too in our lives need to fall before him and recognize his power. We take it for granted. We don't depend on it. We think we can handle it on our own. And yet, Moses, I'm sending you. Who? I am who I am. The one who was and the one who is and the one who will be. And that same God is the God that comes to us today and says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. So that's his power. But what about his presence? And what's interesting then is that Jesus takes that phrase and he uses the phrase I am to describe his presence among us here on this earth and what we can learn or gain from his presence. There's 7 of them. You may have heard of them, the great I am phrases, and I'm just going to, Lord forgive me for not spending more time on these. These should be a whole sermon series right here, but I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version, all right? Jesus in John 6 said, I am the bread of life. He says this after he's fed 5,000 people with 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. Actually, it was more than that. That was just the men. And gets in a discussion, and they're wanting to make him king. And he basically says, look, I am the bread of life. If you take what I offer, you'll never hunger again. And they said, oh, man, bring it on. We love that kind of bread. And he says, oh, no, you misunderstand here. Said, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you cannot have any part with me. And they said, whoa, wait a minute, what are you talking about? And they missed who he was. What he's saying is that he is the one that satisfies spiritual hunger and spiritual thirst. And generation from generation has done one thing. They've sought to fill a God-sized hole in their life with all the wrong things. A theologian has said that we all have God-sized holes in our life. And the only thing that can fill that is Jesus. And yet we try to fill it with all other types of things. And none of them quite get it done. Hear him say to you, I am the bread of life. He is the light of the world. Do you know what? That darkness can never overpower light. You can't open the door and let darkness spill in. It just doesn't happen that way. But if it was dark in here and we opened the door and there was light outside, what spills in? Light. Light always overpowers darkness. And we live in a world that is becoming dark. Why? Because we've taken God out of the world. We've taken God out of the schools. We've taken God out of the media. We've taken God out of Hollywood. We've taken God out of all kinds of places. And what happens when you take light out? Then darkness is there. And Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And He's called us in His Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. He said, what? You are the light of the world. And we need to understand that He is light, and we need to find Him, and we want to keep from finding dark places in our life. We want to get darkness out of our lives. The only way you can do it is let the light of Jesus in. And when you do, it dissipates darkness, because darkness doesn't stand a chance against light. And Jesus said, I am the light. Hear Him say it to you. He wants to be the light in your life. He says Jesus is the gate. He said, I am the gate. You want to find protection from your enemies? It's interesting, in John chapter 10, He gives a picture of Him as a gate, and He's talking about sheep. And He says in verse 9 and 10, He says, they will come in and go out and find pasture. He's talking about sheep. The thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the fullest. And He's saying, we are sheep. And I am the gate. And you want to find protection in your life, you want to find a place of shelter, you want to find a place of comfort, you want to find a place that you can hang out, then go through the gate. Go through Him. And He says, I am there. I'm standing here with the gate wide open. And when you find me, I will protect you. I will watch over you. Hear Him say to you, I am the gate. Jesus is the Good Shepherd. He's the Good Shepherd. In that same chapter, in John chapter 10, He talks about the sheep. Now, I don't need to elaborate much on sheep. You've all heard how dumb sheep are. And it's interesting, Jesus picks sheep to describe us, and that's probably very fitting, because we do some dumb things in life, don't we? And He says, look, I'm the shepherd. I'm there to help you out. I'm there to keep you from falling over the cliff. I'm there to show you where the water is. I'm there to show you where nourishment is. I'm there to take care of you. And He says, I am the good shepherd. And in verse 14 of John 10, He says, I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Do you know the shepherd? Are you listening to Him? He's calling you by name. Hear Him say, I am your shepherd. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. He conquers death and gives eternal life. The context of this saying is in John chapter 11. Mary and Martha had sent word to Jesus, said, hey, Jesus, my brother's sick. Come, help. And Jesus delays intentionally for 2 days. And when Martha meets Him and said, Jesus, it's your fault. If you'd been here, he wouldn't have died. And Jesus very calmly says, I am the resurrection and the life. And the one who believes in me, even though they die, will live. Wow. Is that powerful or what? He is the resurrection and the life. We will all, it's not going to shock anybody when I say we are all going to die someday. Anybody disagree with that? The only way that won't happen is if Jesus comes back and takes us up to be with Him. How do you overcome death? You overcome death through the one who has life. And Jesus said, I am the resurrection and I am the life. And how do you get there? You need to go to Him as the way. Candace, my thing's not clicking there. I'm the resurrection and the life, and I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Aren't you glad that truth is so clear today in our world? Yeah. You don't have to worry about truth, do you? Well, yeah, you do. You can see 3 different news broadcasts all supposedly reporting on the same thing, and you're thinking, wow, those are really different. I've been in situations where I've been there when it's been reported later in the news, and I'm thinking, did they not see the same thing that I did? You never know what to believe in this world, except Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And then he goes on to says, and no one comes to the Father except through me. Well, one final one. Jesus is the true vine. Jesus is the true vine. Vines are interesting. In our first house way back in Springfield, Illinois, years ago, it was a small house and it was fenced in. And on the west side of the yard, there was this fence that had these plastic strips down it so you couldn't see. It was a 6-foot-high fence, and it had kind of grown up back there, so I'm going to clean it all up. I'm going to make it look nice. So I get my pruners out, and there's this big, ugly vine growing through the fence. Comes through, and then it goes around the rest of the fence. And man, that thing's ugly. I don't want to look at that. So I take the pruners and snip that thing. About a week or so, it started dying. I pulled it down. About a week later, I meet my new neighbor. Never met him before, but he was not a happy man. Because that was a grapevine that he had planted and nurtured, and he said, well, it's on the fence. It's both of our property. I said, oh, I'm sorry. I'm a new homeowner. I had no clue. And I guess he forgave me. I never spoke to him again, but I guess he forgave me. He moved, thankfully. Maybe, I don't know. What was interesting is that grapevine grew back. And once I found out I'd cut it, I said, all right, I'm not going to bother that thing anymore. And it grew back, and actually it was much better than it was before. Why did that happen? Because the branches came out of that vine, and it remained connected to the source. And as long as there was still a vine in the ground getting nourishment, it was going to be okay. Jesus is the true vine. But when we cut ourselves off from him, you're going to die. You're going to die spiritually. And the only way you can find nourishment in him is stay connected or be grafted in, reconnect. And that's the amazing thing about Jesus. He allows us to come back after we've cut him off. And I just want you to hear him say, I am the vine, and you are the branches. And if you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. He sustains us. He produces in our lives what needs to be produced. Hear him say to you, I am the vine. We're going to go ahead and sing a couple other songs. And during those songs, listen to Jesus. And what is it he's saying to your life? Maybe you need to reconnect with him. Maybe you need to accept him for the first time in your life. Maybe afterwards you want to get together and talk, or there'll be one of our elders down in the hallway to the left to let you know more about Jesus. If that's where you're at, don't say no to him. Let him into your life. Let's stand and let's continue to worship.